In the later years of World War II, water stopped being a neutral resource. As retreating forces poisoned wells, fouled rivers with fuel, corpses and chemicals, and sabotaged municipal supplies, entire units faced a silent threat that bullets could not solve. Dysentery, typhoid, and chemical contamination could wipe out a battalion faster than enemy fire. Yet soldiers on multiple fronts survived these conditions using a method rarely discussed today, a field-tested water trick that relied on physics, discipline and improvisation rather than modern filtration systems. This was not folklore or desperation guessing. It was taught quietly, used under fire, and then forgotten once the war ended. What follows is the lost water trick that kept soldiers alive when rivers were poisoned. How it worked, why it was trusted, and how the same principles can still be applied today by anyone serious about survival knowledge. Why poisoned rivers became a tactical reality in World War II. By 1943, scorched earth tactics were widespread. Retreating German units in Eastern Europe routinely contaminated wells using animal carcasses, fuel oil, and industrial chemicals. In the Pacific, stagnant water sources were biologically lethal, carrying leptospirosis and amoebic dysentery. In Italy and North Africa, infrastructure sabotage left advancing Allied troops dependent on rivers that had been deliberately fouled upstream. Standard-issue purification tablets were not always available or sufficient. Chlorine could kill bacteria, but could not remove petroleum, heavy metals, or chemical toxins. Boiling helped, but required fuel and time that frontline patrols often lacked. Soldiers needed something more reliable, repeatable, and independent of supply lines. On the battlefield, distillation became, well, the last resort solution for desperate soldiers. The most reliable trick they had up their sleeves was improvised distillation. This method, you see, didn't bother with the contaminants at all. Instead, it focused on separating clean water from everything else, all through evaporation and condensation. Distillation, of course, was known long before the Second World War, but what really made it remarkable back then was the way soldiers adapted it using their issued gear. A steel helmet, for instance, became the very core of the system. Contaminated river water was poured into the helmet and then heated over a small fire or stove. Another helmet, or maybe a mess tin, or even a section of poncho, was positioned above to catch the condensation. As the water boiled, pure steam would rise, leaving all the poisons, bacteria and chemicals behind. That steam then condensed on the cooler surface above and dripped into a clean container, ready to drink. This method worked even when water smelled of fuel or rot. Distillation removed pathogens, heavy metals, and chemical agents alike. It was slow, but it was dependable. Soldiers were trained to prioritize survival over speed, producing small but safe quantities repeatedly. Why charcoal was added and how soldiers made it in the field. Distillation alone removed most threats, but taste and residual vapours could remain, especially with petroleum contamination. Soldiers improved the process by passing the condensed water through charcoal. This was not decorative or optional. Activated charcoal adsorbs organic compounds and chemical residues effectively. Charcoal was created by burning hardwood in low oxygen conditions, often inside a sealed ration tin placed near a fire. Once cooled, it was crushed and packed into cloth, socks, or spare bandage rolls. Water dripping from the distillation setup passed through this charcoal filter before collection. This combination of distillation, followed by charcoal filtration, produced water that was not only safe but palatable enough to prevent dehydration refusal, a real problem in combat units. How discipline and procedure mattered more than equipment. The trick worked because soldiers followed procedure precisely. Containers were cleaned or, even burned out before use. The first condensed drops were discarded to remove volatile compounds. Fires were kept low to prevent splashing contaminated water into the clean collection area. No shortcuts were tolerated because, mistakes meant illness that could incapacitate an entire unit. Field manuals emphasized that water safety was a command responsibility. Units assigned specific soldiers to water preparation, just as others handled weapons or communications. This mindset turned an improvised trick into a repeatable system. Now, how does this World War II method apply today, especially if you find yourself without any modern gear? Well, you see, the same principles really do apply in modern survival situations. If you're ever dealing with a water source that you suspect might be contaminated with chemicals, boiling alone just isn't going to be enough. Distillation, frankly, still stands as the most reliable method you can use if you don't have access to industrial equipment. With just a metal pot, a lid, and a collection cup, you can recreate the system. Charcoal, by the way, can still be produced from hardwood. But, as always, time and patience remain the cost. In disaster zones, where things like fuel spills, flooding, or industrial runoff have compromised water supplies, this method really does bypass all that uncertainty. It doesn't require you to trust tablets, filters, or even the apparent clarity of the water. It relies on physical separation that contaminants cannot defeat. For those preparing for long-term emergencies, practicing this method ahead of time is essential. It teaches resource management, fire control, and procedural discipline, all skills that World War II soldiers relied on daily. Why this knowledge disappeared after the war? Post-war abundance erased the need for improvisation. Municipal treatment systems expanded, bottled water became common, and survival knowledge was relegated to niche manuals. The helmet distiller was no longer taught because it did not fit a world of convenience. Yet history shows that water insecurity returns quickly under stress. War, disasters, and infrastructure failure bring back the same conditions World War II soldiers faced. The knowledge remains as relevant as ever. What World War II teaches us about survival under silent threats? The lost water trick was not heroic or dramatic. It was methodical, disciplined, and effective. It saved lives quietly while history focused on battles and generals. Understanding it reminds us that survival often depends on unglamorous knowledge executed correctly. If this deep dive into forgotten wartime survival methods matters to you, support the preservation of this knowledge. Subscribe to Echoes of Valor, share this episode with fellow history enthusiasts, and keep these lessons alive for the next generation who may need them again.